The Nevada desert was a land of extremes: scorching sun, bone-dry winds, and wild, endless space where only the strongest survived. Out here, legends were born of dust and defiance, and today, every ranch hand at the Callahan spread whispered about just one: Storm, the scarred wild Mustang nobody could break. Storm's coat was a patchwork of old wounds and fresh welts, each a badge of honor from the countless days he had stood against Ramona Callahan's fury. He wasn't the biggest horse in the corral, nor the fastest, but there was something in his eyes, an intelligence, a challenge, that no amount of pain could erase. Some said he'd run free all his life, born under a blood-red sunset, raised by wind and thunder, now caged behind the steel rails of the Callahan ranch. He was Ramona's obsession. Ramona Callahan was as tough as the land she ruled. Her boots stomped through the dust with authority, spurs flashing. She'd broken dozens of Mustangs, built her reputation on turning wild spirits into docile beasts. But Storm refused to yield, and with every failed attempt, Ramona's pride grew brittle. The hands watched from the shadows, muttering among themselves, unsure if they pitied the horse or feared their boss more. On this blistering afternoon, tension shimmered in the air. Storm stood alone in the round pen, sweat streaking his flanks. Ramona entered, whip in hand, jaw set with the promise of victory. "You're gonna learn who's boss today," she snarled, circling him with practiced menace. The ranch hands gathered silently along the fence line, eyes flicking nervously from Storm's wild stare to Ramona's cold determination. The session began the way it always did: Ramona snapping commands, Storm refusing to budge. She cracked the whip, sharp and cruel, the sound echoing across the desert. Storm jerked but did not retreat, planting his hooves in the sand. Ramona lashed again, harder. The ranch hands flinched. "That's enough, Ramona." One started, but her glare cut him off. She pressed on, sweat trickling down her temple, as if punishing the Mustang could heal her wounded pride. Then something snapped, not in the horse but in the moment itself. Ramona's patience frayed, her voice rising. She swung the whip with all her strength, the tip striking Storm's flank and opening a fresh wound. Storm's head shot up, nostrils flaring. He let out a scream, high and raw, and then, without warning, he reared up, hooves lashing the air. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The ranch hands sucked in their breath, eyes wide as Storm towered over Ramona, his mane wild, his silhouette a thundercloud against the sun. Ramona stumbled back, stumbling on loose gravel, but her stubbornness held her feet. "Down, you damn animal!" she shouted, but Storm had reached his breaking point. With the force of desperation and fury, he crashed down, not on Ramona, but just inches in front of her, hooves pounding the dust. The impact sent her sprawling backward, landing hard in the dirt. The whip flew from her hand, landing just out of reach. The ranch hands rushed forward, unsure whether to help Ramona or protect themselves from the Mustang's wrath. For a moment, Storm and Ramona locked eyes, hers blazing with humiliation, his burning with something unbreakable. All her power, all her bluster, shattered in that silent standoff. Blood trickled from Storm's fresh wound, but he did not flinch. He stood tall, chest heaving, every muscle quivering, but his spirit, untamed, unbowed, was on full display. The ranch hands exchanged looks. Some felt a flicker of hope, others a pang of guilt. Storm's rebellion had shattered more than Ramona's pride. It had broken the spell she held over this place. The whispers grew louder, rumors spreading like wildfire. No horse had ever lasted this long. No one had ever dared to fight back so boldly. Ramona scrambled to her feet, face red with rage and embarrassment. "Back in the pen!" she shouted, voice cracking. But Storm wouldn't move. Instead, he snorted, turning his flank, refusing to acknowledge her command. She lunged for the whip, but a ranch hand stepped between them, shaking his head. "Enough, Ramona. Let it go." For once, Ramona hesitated. The moment stretched, thick with tension and dust and something new. Respect, maybe, or fear. With one final snort, Storm wheeled around, charging the edge of the pen. He crashed against the rails, shaking the entire structure. The gate groaned, hinges straining. Ramona screamed at the hands to stop him, but none dared step in his way. As the sun dipped lower, painting the desert gold, Storm stood alone in the pen, bruised, bloodied, but victorious. Ramona stormed away, her authority in pieces, her pride trailing behind her like a broken shadow. The ranch hands drifted off in silence, casting glances back at the Mustang who refused to bow. And as night crept in, Storm lifted his head to the sky, his spirit untamed, his legend just beginning. Ramona Callahan's humiliation burned hotter than the Nevada sun, and by the next morning, her pride had hardened into something far more dangerous, a vendetta. In the big ranch house, her voice thundered as she barked orders, her rage infecting every inch of the place. "No one laughs at Ramona Callahan. Not a damn horse, not anyone," she growled. The ranch hands shuffled uneasily, not daring to remind her that they had, in fact, watched Storm make her a fool in front of everyone. Instead, they gathered in the yard, some carrying ropes, others preparing the old cattle trucks, glancing anxiously at one another. Ramona paced by the pen, revolver holstered at her hip, whip dangling from her fist. Storm stood on the far side, battered but unbroken, flanks marred with fresh scabs. He was more alert than ever, every muscle coiled, nostrils twitching at the nervous energy of the humans assembling. He could feel something big was coming, and this time, he wouldn't wait for them to bring it to him. "All right," Ramona snapped. "I want that Mustang, and I want him today. If he escapes, you'll be rounding up wild cattle in Death Valley till your bones turn white. Move." The men moved in, but Storm wasn't waiting. As they fanned out to corner him, he launched into motion, a flash of power and fury. He kicked the corral gate, already weakened from yesterday's battle, and the latch popped free. In an instant, he bolted through, surging past the startled men and into the open yard. The hands shouted, ropes flying, but Storm was too fast. He veered left, hooves tearing up the earth, straight for the fence that divided the ranch from the open range. Ramona screamed, "Get the trucks! Don't let him go!" Storm hit the outer fence at full gallop, barely slowing as he crashed through the splintering boards. Blood ran from his side, but he didn't care. Freedom was within reach, and he would die before letting Ramona put her hands on him again. Beyond the ranch, the land stretched wide and wild, rolling sagebrush, jagged rocks, gullies, and cactus patches. The endless kingdom of the Mustangs. The trucks roared to life behind him, engines snarling as they tore across the ranch, dust billowing in their wake. Ramona herself drove the lead truck, eyes narrowed with fury, shouting directions into her radio. "He's heading north, toward the old creek bed. Cut him off at the ridge." Spotters with binoculars clambered into pickup beds, pointing as Storm's dark silhouette streaked across the landscape. The chase was on. Storm ran with everything he had, heart hammering, lungs burning. But the humans would not give up. The trucks bumped and skidded across the uneven ground, headlights slicing through the afternoon glare. Ranch hands on dirt bikes joined in, kicking up grit as they tried to flank the Mustang, waving ropes and yelling threats. Storm darted through a thicket of brambles, the thorns tearing at his legs. He didn't falter. A dirt bike shot past, too close. Storm bucked wildly, catching the rider's eye. The young man wobbled, lost his nerve, and peeled off rather than risk getting kicked. The legend of Storm grew with every minute of the chase. The others, watching from the ranch, whispered in awe. No horse had ever made it this far. At the edge of the property, Storm faced his greatest obstacle, a battered wire fence, and beyond it, a shallow ravine choked with scrub. The trucks circled behind, engines revving, as Ramona shouted from her window, "This is your last chance, you stubborn beast!" But Storm would not be cornered. With a desperate cry, he charged the fence, hurling his body over the wires. The barbs snagged his skin, fresh blood staining his coat. But he landed on the other side, trembling but upright. The men skidded to a halt, unable to follow across the ravine, and Ramona pounded the steering wheel, cursing the wild Mustang with every word she knew. For a moment, Storm paused atop a rocky outcrop, looking back at the chaos below. He saw the ranch hands slumped in defeat, Ramona still shouting in vain, the trucks idling uselessly on the wrong side of the divide. He lifted his head, mane whipping in the wind, and let out a call, a triumphant, wild scream that echoed across the empty land. But freedom came at a price. Storm's legs quivered from exhaustion, every breath ragged with pain, new wounds burning where brambles and barbed wire had found his flesh. Dusk crept across the sky, painting the Nevada desert in shades of red and purple, and Storm ran on, away from the shouts and engines, into the silent embrace of the wild. Behind him, Ramona made a silent vow. "I will find you, Storm. You're mine. No one makes a fool out of me." Her voice carried in the gathering darkness, but it couldn't catch him now. As the last rays of sunlight vanished behind the mountains, Storm disappeared into the open desert, a battered silhouette against the vast, wild horizon. The ranch was far behind him, and for the first time in days, the only thing he heard was the whisper of the wind and the beat of his own heart. Every aching stride was a victory, a promise to himself that he would never let anyone break him, no matter the cost. The legend of Storm grew that night, and those who witnessed his escape would tell the story for years. The Mustang who outran every truck, defied every chain, and vanished into freedom just as the world turned gold. As the last bruised streaks of sunset faded from the Nevada sky, Storm pressed on, legs trembling with exhaustion, sweat and blood drying stiff in his coat. Every muscle ached, every scrape burned, but he didn't stop until the lights of the Callahan Ranch were just a memory flickering far behind him. He had never felt so raw, exhilarated, yes, but hollowed out by the violence and desperation of his escape. When night fully arrived, the desert transformed. The wind picked up, colder now, whistling through lonely sagebrush and tossing sand across the empty flats. Stars blinked awake above, countless and sharp, indifferent to the battles fought below. Storm slowed, picking his way across rocky ground until he found a low canyon with a trickle of water winding through it. Here, sheltered by the stone walls, he finally allowed himself to collapse. His chest heaved, each breath labored and painful. He folded his long legs beneath him and lay still, ears flicking at every sound. Coyotes howled in the distance, their voices eerie and haunting, rising and falling across the valley. For a moment, Storm tensed, fearing pursuit, but the howls were far away, no closer than any help would be. He was alone, painfully, utterly alone. The pain crept in now that the adrenaline had faded. Storm licked at the wounds along his legs and flanks, tasting the copper tang of blood. Barbed wire and brambles had left angry marks, and a deep ache throbbed along his left shoulder where he'd collided with the fence. His stomach growled, but there was nothing here but scrubby grass and muddy water. He drank deeply, the cool liquid soothing his parched throat, then rested his head on his foreleg. with nothing but the hush of the night and the distant call of coyotes for company. Storm drifted in and out of a restless sleep. Dreams came, memories, really, of the time before the pen and whip, before the smell of fear. In his mind, he ran with his old herd under wide open skies, wind in his mane and the thrum of hooves all around. He remembered the laughter of foals, the calls of mares, the salty tang of freedom on his tongue. Those days felt like another life now, impossibly distant. A sudden rustle in the brush snapped him awake, heart pounding. He raised his head, eyes wide, nostrils flaring for any hint of danger. But it was only a jackrabbit, darting past on some midnight errand. Storm exhaled, settling again, but the tension never fully left his body. Out here, alone and wounded, he was vulnerable, not just to the humans who might still be hunting him, but to every predator and hardship the desert could throw his way. The hours stretched on, marked only by the shifting patterns of the stars and the cold that crept deeper into his bones. Storm shivered, tucking his nose into his side, his breath rising in thin clouds. His mind wandered, sometimes back to the past, sometimes forward to the unknown future. Would he ever find his herd again? Did they remember him? Or had they moved on, accepting the loss of another stallion to the strange violence of human hands? Yet even as doubt gnawed at him, something fierce remained, a stubborn core of will that refused to give up. Storm's spirit was battered, but not broken. The desert was harsh, yes, but it was honest. It did not lie or promise mercy, but it gave freedom to those who could survive it. Out here, every star overhead seemed to whisper the same wild promise: you are still free. A little before dawn, Storm tried to stand. His legs wobbled, and for a moment he nearly fell, but sheer stubbornness kept him upright. He limped to the water's edge, drank again, then stood, head low, as the first faint blush of sunrise appeared on the horizon. He listened, to the distant echo of coyotes, to the gentle burble of water, to the soft rustle of wind in the canyon grass. Every sound was sharp, clear, and strangely comforting. He was alive. He was hurting, but alive. As the light crept in, Storm surveyed his wounds. They would heal, some had before. Hunger gnawed at him, but survival was nothing new. He moved carefully through the canyon, nibbling at sparse grass, testing each step, learning the shape of the land. Every ache, every scar, was a reminder of what he'd endured, but also of what he refused to surrender. High above, a hawk circled, casting a fleeting shadow across the ground. Storm lifted his head, watching the bird soar, untouchable, wild, free. He felt a kinship then, a spark of hope, a reminder that as long as he kept moving, he could never truly be captured. The night had not defeated him. In the silent, aching darkness, Storm had survived, alone but not broken, wounded but unbowed. The desert was cruel, but it was his now. He had earned it, inch by bloody inch, and somewhere far away, the world would wake to news of his escape, the legend of the unbreakable Mustang growing with each retelling. But Storm cared nothing for legends. All he wanted now was to keep moving, to heal, to remember what it meant to be free beneath the endless Nevada sky. Morning light crept gently into the canyon, painting the red rock walls gold and turning the world soft and quiet. Storm barely slept, exhaustion clinging to him like a shroud. Each time he dozed off, the pain in his wounds or the ghostly echo of Ramona's angry shouts jolted him awake. When the sun finally rose high enough to warm his aching muscles, he willed himself to stand and limp along the stony creek, searching for thicker grass or a hidden spring. The desert was harsh, but it was honest. At least here there were no whips or fences, only the struggle to survive. He didn't know he was being watched. At the rim of the canyon, a young woman with dark hair tucked beneath a sun-faded baseball cap scanned the shadows below, her eyes careful and kind. Harper Reyes was no stranger to these wild lands. She'd grown up just a few towns over, raised by a mother who taught her that the world belonged as much to wild things as it did to people. Now, a volunteer for a local Mustang rescue, Harper spent her free time hiking the backcountry, carrying first aid and a quiet hope that she might someday save a life. She'd heard whispers at the general store, in the feed shop, and online. Rumors about Ramona Callahan's cruelty and a wild Mustang who'd stood his ground. The stories painted Storm as a legend, half real, half myth. Harper didn't know what she expected to find, but as she descended the rocky slope, she paused when she spotted movement below. A horse, dark and battered, favoring one leg, with a wild mane that gleamed even in the shadows. Storm froze, instinctively tense, his ears swiveling toward the faint crunch of boots on gravel. He could smell her, a mix of sweat, leather, wildflowers. Humans always meant trouble, and he bunched his muscles, ready to run even though every bone and bruise screamed in protest. But Harper stopped well back, at the edge of the creek, and knelt down in the dust, her body language easy and open. She set her backpack on a rock and slowly unzipped it, pulling out a battered water bottle. With practiced hands, she poured water into a collapsible bowl and set it near the creek, just far enough away that Storm could approach if he dared. She didn't speak, didn't reach for him, didn't move suddenly. Instead, she waited, her own breathing slow and steady. Storm watched, nostrils flaring, uncertain, his memories twisted between the sting of whips and the rare moments of kindness. A ranch hand who'd once snuck him an apple, a child's giggle drifting over a fence. The woman in front of him was different. She smelled of the outdoors and patience, not fear or anger. Minutes passed, 10, maybe 20. The sun rose higher, warming the rocks, and Storm's thirst won out. Cautiously, he limped forward, stopping every few steps to study her. Harper didn't move. When he reached the bowl, he lowered his head, muscles tense as a bowstring, and drank deeply, eyes never leaving her face. Harper allowed herself a small smile. "That's it, buddy," she murmured softly, her words more for herself than for him. "You take your time." She slowly reached into her pack, pulled out a Ziploc bag of hay cubes, and scattered a few on the ground, then slid the bag away. She knew trust was something you earned, not something you took. Storm sniffed at the strange food, but didn't eat. Instead, he watched her, testing the boundaries. Harper simply sat, pulling out her phone, not to film but to send a quiet text to the wildlife rescue group. Found the Mustang, injured but alive. Need backup. Will observe and provide water, food. Will not approach. She hit send, slipped the phone away, and pulled her notebook from her pack. She began to sketch. Nothing fancy, just the rough lines of a horse, the shape of his wounds, the proud set of his neck. Every so often she looked up, meeting Storm's wary gaze, and nodded as if to say, "I see you. I'm not here to hurt you." As the morning faded into afternoon, Harper set up a small camp near the edge of the canyon. She made no move to corner or capture Storm, instead laying out her gear with gentle, deliberate movements. She brewed tea on a tiny stove, the smell drifting on the breeze. Occasionally she hummed, a habit she picked up from her mother. Soft, tuneless sounds that seemed to settle the air. Storm found himself drawn to her presence, not out of curiosity, but because she was the first human in memory who didn't bring pain. He lingered near the creek, never quite turning his back, but relaxing fractionally as the day wore on. The silence between them was not awkward, but respectful, a kind of truce. By evening, Harper contacted the authorities again, reporting Storm's condition and location. "I'll stay nearby," she promised. "He's skittish, but I think he trusts me, just a little. Please hurry, but don't bring a crowd." She closed her phone and looked out at the wild horse. "We'll get you help, I promise. But it's your choice, not mine." As the sun slipped behind the red rock, casting long shadows over the canyon, Storm felt something he hadn't in days: hope. Maybe this human was different. Maybe the world, brutal as it was, still held a corner of kindness. The desert grew quiet again, but Storm no longer felt completely alone. In the uncertain twilight, beneath a sky ablaze with stars, the Mustang and the young woman watched each other, two survivors, both longing for trust, both willing to wait. The desert woke slowly, warmed by the first pink fingers of sunrise. A thin mist hung over the canyon's trickling creek, dappling the ground with pale light. Storm blinked in the cool hush, muscles stiff but not as sore as the day before. For a moment, he wondered if he'd dreamed the gentle visitor, the woman with soft hands and patient eyes. But there she was, curled in her sleeping bag near the edge of her camp, a battered cowboy hat shading her face. Harper stirred at the sound of hooves on gravel. She opened her eyes and sat up, careful not to make any sudden moves. Storm stood at the water's edge, staring at her, uncertain but unafraid. Harper smiled and murmured, "Good morning, handsome." Her voice was low, more melody than words, meant to soothe rather than startle. She moved slowly, never rising to her full height, as she poured fresh water into the collapsible bowl and scattered a few hay cubes nearby. Storm hesitated. His instincts warred. Run, always run. But his body remembered yesterday. The clean water, the safety, the lack of pain. He stepped forward, neck arched, and drank while keeping his wary gaze fixed on her. Harper scribbled in her journal as she watched. Day 2, he approached for water, less skittish than yesterday. Still not interested in food, but not rejecting it. Wounds look bad, but not infected. Trust takes time, especially when someone's only known cruelty. She kept her camp small, never encroaching on Storm's space. Every action was deliberate. She'd been trained by wild horse rescuers who believed that trust had to be earned at the horse's pace, never forced. Harper spent the morning quietly tending to her chores, mending a torn shirt, boiling water for tea, humming under her breath. Whenever Storm watched, she kept her hands visible, her movements slow. Gradually, the rhythm of the day set in. Storm drank from the creek, nibbled a little grass, and even tested the hay cubes when Harper looked away. He watched her curiously as she set up a first aid kit nearby, laying out bandages and ointment for later, if he'd allow her near enough. In her journal, she wrote, "Progress. He's eating when I don't watch. Still limping, but moving better. I'm not sure he'll let me close. That's okay. It's his choice." As noon approached, the desert shimmered with heat. Harper sat in the scant shade reading quietly, the occasional sound of a page turning the only sign of life. Storm grazed at a cautious distance, keeping her within sight but no longer on edge. A cottontail darted through the camp, making Storm snort in surprise, but Harper only laughed. A light, clear sound that echoed off the rocks and seemed to ease something inside the Mustang. By the third day, Harper tried something new. She scooped up water and gently splashed her own arm, wincing theatrically as if it stung, then dabbed at her sleeve with ointment. Storm watched, nostrils twitching. She repeated the motion, letting him see that healing was not an act of force but of care. That evening, as dusk painted the sky in lavender and rose, Storm limped closer than ever before. Harper barely breathed as she held out her hand, palm up, offering a hay cube. The Mustang hesitated. One step, then another. Finally, he stretched his neck, lips brushing her fingers as he took the food. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. This simple act, so small and yet monumental, Harper's throat tightened with emotion. "You're brave," she whispered, not daring to move. So brave. She didn't reach for him, didn't try to stroke his mane. Instead, she sat still as a stone, letting Storm set the pace. He snorted, ears flicking, and stepped back, but not as far as before. That night, Harper made a fire for warmth, the orange glow flickering over her thoughtful face. She recorded a voice memo on her phone. "Storm let me feed him from my hand tonight. I think he's starting to trust me just a little. I wish everyone who'd ever heard a horse could see how long it takes to undo that kind of fear." Her voice wavered, thick with feeling. "He's so strong. If anyone deserves a second chance, it's him." She sent another message to her rescue group. "Progress slow, but promising. He's taking food from my hand. Wounds not worsening. Please bring more supplies, but come quietly. No loud trucks, no ropes. He needs space." The moon rose, silvering the canyon walls as Storm circled the camp. He settled near the edge of her firelight, close enough to feel its warmth, but far enough to retreat if he needed. Harper wrapped herself in her sleeping bag, humming softly, a song from her childhood about wild things finding their way home. Through the night, Storm watched the stars, listened to the quiet breath of the human sleeping nearby, and let himself hope that maybe, this time, trust would not lead to pain. The world was still dangerous, still wild and unpredictable, but in this pocket of quiet kindness, healing had begun. Not just of wounds, but of old scars, too. And somewhere inside, both human and Mustang sensed a change, a fragile, growing faith that, for the first time in a long while, neither of them was truly alone. The desert dawned hot and tense, as if the land itself sensed a storm brewing. Storm woke to the distant rumble of engines echoing over the canyon rim, a sound he'd come to fear. Harper heard it too, her hand pausing over her journal as she looked toward the east. She felt the hair on her arms prickle, sensing the approach of trouble before it came into view. Storm lifted his head, ears forward, body tense. Harper spoke quietly, not taking her eyes off the horizon. "Easy, boy. Stay close." She gathered her things with practiced speed, her heartbeat loud in her chest. She knew the peace they'd found here couldn't last forever, not with Ramona Callahan still out there, her pride wounded and her vengeance burning hot. Within the hour, the roar grew louder. 2 trucks appeared at the canyon's edge, dust billowing behind their tires. Harper recognized one of them instantly. Ramona's silver Chevy, the side door stamped with the Callahan Ranch brand. The other truck was filled with men, some ranch hands, some just local muscle, all wearing the same wary expression. Ramona herself stepped out, dressed in her trademark boots and a hat pulled low over her eyes, a coiled whip hanging from her belt. She swept her gaze across the canyon, lips curling when she saw Harper and the Mustang below. "Well, well," she called down, her voice hard as gravel. "Didn't expect to find you playing horse whisperer, Harper Reyes." Her tone made Harper's skin crawl. Harper rose to her feet, arms out in a calming gesture between Ramona's crew and Storm, who had retreated behind a scrubby mesquite. She stood her ground, voice steady. "He's injured, Ramona. He needs medical care, not more chasing and pain. Leave him be." Ramona laughed, though there was no humor in it. That horse is mine. He's worth more than your truck, and you know it. You got two choices. Walk away now, or get out of my way. She signaled to her men to fan out and block the exit to the canyon. Harper shook her head, steel in her voice. You don't own him, not out here. This is public land, and you know what you did to him. I've already contacted the wildlife authorities. They're on their way, and they know exactly what kind of training you've been doing. She kept her body between Ramona and the Mustang, heart pounding but refusing to show fear. A tense silence fell. One of Ramona's men hesitated, glancing back at her. The authority in Harper's voice and the quiet certainty in her eyes seemed to shake the certainty of those following Ramona's lead. Ramona stalked forward, whip twitching in her hand. You think you're some hero, huh? Just another bleeding heart trying to ruin my business. I'll have you charged with theft. But Harper cut her off. No, you'll be charged with animal cruelty if you take another step. I have photos, reports, and witnesses. Look around, Ramona. These men aren't going to stand by and watch you hurt another living creature. Harper glanced at the ranch hands. Several looked away, shifting their feet, guilt written on their faces. As if on cue, a second vehicle appeared at the top of the trail, this one with the State Wildlife Department logo emblazoned on the side. Two officers stepped out, one with a tranquilizer gun slung over his shoulder, the other carrying a clipboard. The taller officer, a woman with a stern jaw and mirrored sunglasses, called out, "Everyone back away from the horse, now!" Ramona's bravado flickered, but she tried one last play, striding up to the officer, her tone oozing false charm. "Officer, this horse belongs to me. He's dangerous. You have to let me take him back to my ranch, for everyone's safety." The officer didn't blink. "Ma'am, we've received multiple complaints about your handling of Mustangs. We're here to ensure this animal's welfare. If you interfere, you could be facing charges. You are not authorized to touch this horse." She motioned for her partner to approach Storm slowly, keeping his movements calm and non-threatening. The standoff hung on a knife edge. Ramona's face was a mask of fury and disbelief. She was not used to being told no, especially not in public. "You're making a mistake," she spat at Harper, but her words rang hollow, her power slipping as the ranch hands and even her own men pulled back. Harper stood firm, voice shaking only a little as she replied, "The only mistake was thinking you could break something just because you wanted to own it." She locked eyes with Ramona, refusing to back down. The officers spoke quietly with Harper, confirming her story and checking Storm's wounds. "You did the right thing, Miss Reyes," the woman officer said, nodding approvingly. "We'll file a report. Ramona Callahan, you are hereby warned to cease all attempts to retrieve this animal. Any further harassment or attempts at capture will result in charges." Ramona glared, humiliated and cornered. "This isn't over," she hissed, her words venomous. But she had no choice. Her empire was slipping, her reputation bruised before an audience that had once feared her. The ranch hands retreated, some murmuring apologies, some simply glad it was over. The wildlife officers set up a temporary perimeter, ensuring Storm could rest undisturbed until a long-term plan was made. Harper finally exhaled, her knees shaking, the adrenaline crashing through her system now that the danger had passed. She looked at Storm, who had watched the confrontation with wild, cautious eyes. She whispered, "You're safe now. No one's ever going to hurt you again." As the afternoon sun blazed above them, Harper realized that courage wasn't just about facing down cruelty. It was about standing up, no matter how scared you were, for what was right. Storm edged closer, as if sensing the change. For the first time, he let his muzzle brush Harper's shoulder, a silent thank you. a gesture born from hard-won trust. And in that canyon, surrounded by the ruins of old power and the promise of new beginnings, the balance finally shifted. Ramona's reign was broken. Storm, battered but unbeaten, stood tall in the golden light, free for now, and finally seen. For the first time in weeks, the canyon was peaceful. The shouts and engines were gone, replaced by the steady hum of insects and the distant call of a hawk. Storm stood in the late afternoon sun, wounds carefully bandaged by wildlife officers, his mane catching the breeze. He was still wary, muscles tight with the memory of pursuit, but a new sense of safety hovered over the camp, fragile but real. Harper sat on a flat rock not far from him, legs tucked beneath her, her voice quiet and hopeful as she talked with the wildlife team. "He trusts me," she said, glancing over her shoulder at Storm. "If anyone can bring him in gently, I can." There was pride in her voice, but also humility, the recognition that trust from a creature like Storm was never a guarantee, always a gift. The officers conferred, checking their notes, radios crackling. They explained that Storm couldn't stay in the canyon forever, not with Ramona lurking, not with the threat of new dangers as word spread about the unbreakable Mustang. "He's a symbol now," said Officer Marks, shaking her head. "Reporters are calling. Locals want to see him. If he stays wild, there's a risk someone else will try to claim him. Or worse." Harper's jaw tightened. She knew the wild was Storm's birthright, but she also understood how cruel the world could be to a legend. She approached him slowly, every gesture deliberate, stopping at the boundary he'd set days before. She held out her hand, palm open, a gentle invitation rather than a command. "Storm," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I know you don't owe us anything. You've survived more than most ever will, but I want to give you a choice. Come with me to the rescue center. There you'll be safe. No whips, no fences you can't walk away from. Just green fields and a second chance. Or if you want, I'll open the gate and you can run free. No one will chase you, not ever again, I promise." Storm flicked his ears, nose twitching at the scent of her skin and the faint trace of hay she'd brought. His wounds still throbbed, but the ache of captivity was gone. He looked at the open gate the officers had set up, a makeshift corral, the only barrier between him and the vast Nevada desert. Beyond the wire, the land shimmered with heat, wild and unknown. Harper's heart pounded as she waited. The world seemed to hold its breath, even the officers watching in silence. No cameras raised, no voices breaking the moment. It was Storm's decision. In that stillness, memories flashed in the Mustang's mind. Endless nights beneath the stars, the roar of wind over the plains, the thrill of racing other colts in the dusk. But also the sting of rope, the pain of the whip, the loneliness of the pen. Freedom was beautiful, but it was also brutal. He stepped toward Harper, closer than ever before, his muzzle brushing her shoulder in silent acknowledgement. She let her hand rest on his neck, feeling the heat and strength in his body, the pulse of his wild heart. Tears pricked her eyes. "Whatever you choose, I'm proud of you," she murmured, barely audible. Storm lingered, torn between comfort and the call of the wild. He saw the sanctuary in Harper's eyes, a promise of safety, gentleness, the chance to heal. He saw the open desert beyond, where danger and freedom danced side by side. The moment stretched, the sun inching lower, golden light haloing horse and human alike. Behind Harper, a small crowd had gathered. Ranch hands, townsfolk, reporters drawn by the story of the unbreakable Mustang. Cameras hung at their sides, but no one dared move, afraid to shatter the delicate spell. Harper knelt, laying her hands in the dust, giving Storm space to decide. "I won't close the gate," she said, her voice cracking. "If you want to stay, you'll be safe. If you want to go, you're free. This is your moment, Storm. It's yours." The Mustang lifted his head, mane rippling, eyes clear and bright. He looked once more at Harper, then at the gate, then at the endless wild beyond. With a powerful surge, he broke into a trot, then a canter, heading for the threshold between captivity and the unknown. Harper's breath caught as Storm reached the gate, pausing just a moment, enough for everyone to see the scars on his body and the unbroken fire in his spirit. The crowd held still, not daring to cheer, not daring to mourn. For a heartbeat, it seemed Storm might choose safety. He looked back at Harper, nostrils flaring, and the pain of goodbye flickered in his gaze. Then, with a snort and a toss of his head, he bolted through the open gate, hooves striking sparks from the hard Nevada earth. He ran, not from fear, but from the need to answer the call of his own wild soul. The crowd let out a collective sigh, part sorrow, part awe, as Storm disappeared into the fading sun, a silhouette against the desert sky. Harper rose, wiping her tears, heart aching but full of pride. She watched until he vanished, whispering, "Be free, Storm. Be legend." And so, with one final, unforgettable choice, Storm reclaimed his wildness, leaving behind a world forever changed by the courage of one Mustang who refused to bow. A hush swept over the crowd as Storm vanished through the open gate, his silhouette framed for an instant by the dying sun. Then, just like that, he was gone, swallowed by the boundless Nevada desert, a flash of dark mane and scarred muscle moving faster than anyone thought possible for a horse who'd survived so much. The air crackled with awe, heavy with the knowledge that they had witnessed something rare, not just an escape, but a reclaiming of destiny. Harper stood transfixed, a knot in her throat as she watched the Mustang blur into the red dust and sage. Every part of her wanted to follow, to make sure he was safe, to offer him one last touch or word of comfort. But she didn't move. Storm had made his choice. He had chosen the wild, and with it, the uncertain promise of freedom. Tears stung her eyes, but her chest swelled with pride. Not all happy endings meant staying close. Word spread fast. By the time the last truck pulled away, local reporters were already on the phone to their stations, and townsfolk snapped pictures of the open gate and the trampled dust. Headlines would soon follow. "Unbreakable Mustang runs free. Nevada's wild spirit lives on." Those who'd come hoping to see a broken animal rescued were now left with a new story, one of defiance, hope, and the irresistible call of the wild. Storm ran hard until the canyon was far behind him, lungs burning, the wind stinging his wounds. He did not look back, not even once. Every stride drove him deeper into the heart of the desert, toward memories of open nights and the distant thunder of hooves. He found a high ridge as the sky blazed orange, pausing to scan the endless expanse below. Somewhere out there, his old herd might still roam. Somewhere a place existed where no human voice could command him. He moved with purpose, following the scents and sounds of the land. By midnight, the moon hung high, painting the world silver. Storm crossed dry creek beds and wove through tangles of mesquite, his body protesting with every step, but his heart surging with a sense of rightness. The wounds and bruises still hurt, but freedom eased their ache. For the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't running from something. He was running toward it. Meanwhile, back at the edge of civilization, Storm's legend was taking shape. The crowd had broken up, but not before dozens of photos were snapped. Images of Storm at the threshold, of Harper's tearful face, of the battered corral now swinging empty in the dusk. A local journalist, Sarah Kim, posted a single image online. Storm, mid-stride, dust and sunset mingling in a cloud around him, a wildness in his eyes that no lens could fully capture. The post went viral overnight. "He's not just a horse," Sarah wrote. "He's hope. He's a reminder that freedom, once tasted, can never be caged." Comments flooded in, some from horse lovers, some from city dwellers who'd never seen a Mustang. All moved by the courage in Storm's story, reporters camped out at the rescue center, interviewing Harper and the officers who had stood up to Ramona. The story resonated across state lines. The Mustang who refused to bow, the young woman who fought for compassion, the small town that had witnessed a legend born in dust and struggle. Ramona Callahan, meanwhile, felt the tide turning against her. Her ranch became the subject of quiet investigations, with old ranch hands coming forward to share stories of her cruelty. For years, she had ruled with fear, but now, emboldened by Storm's escape and Harper's stand, even her own employees found the courage to speak out. The local paper ran an editorial demanding better protections for wild horses and calling for reforms in ranching practices. The wind had shifted. The town was no longer silent. But it was Storm who changed most. Days passed, and gradually, his presence began to ripple across the landscape. Other wild horses, at first cautious, soon accepted him among them. Storm was older, battle-worn, but his spirit was undimmed. The scars only made him more respected. His defiant charge through the open gate remembered in every snort and challenge for leadership. One evening, as a group of hikers crossed a distant ridge, they spotted a herd galloping in the dying light. Storm at their center, his mane flying, his stride strong. Someone snapped a blurry photo, and the image found its way online, reigniting the legend. Storm was alive, running wild, exactly as he was meant to be. Harper followed the updates from afar, her heart both heavy and light. She led talks at the rescue center, her voice growing stronger with every retelling of Storm's journey. She didn't hide the hard parts, the cruelty, the fear, the doubt. "It's not about ownership," she told a packed meeting at the town hall. "It's about respect, about giving wild things the right to choose their path, even if it means letting go." As the weeks turned into months, Storm's legacy grew. New volunteers signed up at the rescue, eager to help. Legislation was drafted for stricter protections on Nevada's wild horses. And every so often, someone reported seeing Storm at dusk, head high, scars gleaming, surrounded by his herd, a living testament to the power of survival and the promise of a new beginning. Out there, beneath 1,000 stars, Storm ran free. The wild was his again, not because someone gave it to him, but because he claimed it for himself. And in the hush that followed his passing, the desert remembered his name, not as a prisoner, but as a legend. News of Storm's wild escape and the dramatic confrontation at the canyon spread across Nevada and beyond, but the echoes lingered longest in the small communities that had watched the story unfold firsthand. At first, the town buzzed with excitement and debate. At diners, in feed stores, and online forums, everyone seemed to have an opinion. Some marveled at Storm's spirit. Others wondered if he'd survive in the wild. But for Harper Reyes, the days that followed were filled with something else, a quiet, growing purpose. She became a fixture at community meetings, her presence gentle but impossible to ignore. In the crowded back room of the local library, she spoke to parents, ranchers, and kids, anyone who would listen. She told Storm's story in her own words, without embellishment, letting the facts and feelings do the work. She showed pictures. Storm's battered body, his wary eyes the first morning she found him. The image of him running free, mane alight in the setting sun. At one meeting, Harper stood in front of a whiteboard, her boots dusted from the trails. "Compassion isn't weakness," she said, her voice clear and steady. "It takes strength to survive cruelty, but even more to trust again. Real compassion means respecting freedom, not enforcing obedience." She paused, scanning the room. We can't call ourselves caretakers if all we do is break the things that frighten us or try to own what isn't meant to be owned. A hush fell. Harper saw it in the faces around her, some resistant, some moved, some wrestling with old lessons and new truths. She continued, softer now. "The wild doesn't owe us anything. Its beauty, its danger, its unpredictability, that's the gift. When we learn to respect it, we become part of something bigger than ourselves." Her words stuck with people in ways she hadn't expected. Children drew pictures of wild Mustangs galloping across the desert, taping them to classroom walls and fridge doors. Teachers invited Harper in for talks, asking her to explain how patience and kindness could heal even the deepest wounds. At the senior center, men who'd worked ranches all their lives debated the old ways and wondered aloud if things could change. Even some of Ramona's former ranch hands, their loyalty shaken by the public showdown, found themselves rethinking old loyalties. Over mugs of black coffee at the local diner, a few admitted that seeing Storm stand up to Ramona and survive had rattled them. "We all knew she was hard," one man confessed. "But watching that horse, I don't know, made me feel like we'd crossed a line." The biggest surprise came weeks later, when the town council, often a slow-moving, tradition-bound group, invited Harper to present ideas for humane Mustang management. She brought research, stories from rescue groups, and the testimony of others who'd witnessed Storm's journey. "We can protect our wild herds," she argued, "and still honor the ranching tradition. It starts with respect for the land, for the animals, for each other." Her advocacy inspired small changes that rippled outward. Local authorities pledged stricter oversight of ranches, with Mustang holding pens. Wildlife officers began regular patrols of public land, checking for illegal traps and abuse. Volunteers stepped up to monitor herds, reporting injuries and ensuring that new foals were counted, not corralled. The local newspaper, which had once run advertisements for Ramona's ranch, published a front-page editorial celebrating Storm's spirit and calling for a new era of coexistence. Online, Harper's blog posts about Storm drew hundreds of comments. Readers from across the country, some horse owners, some city dwellers who'd never seen a Mustang except in pictures, wrote in with their own stories of healing and hope. "My daughter was bullied at school," one mother shared, "but when she heard about Storm, she wanted to go back. She said if he could survive, so could she." Harper never claimed to be a hero. She wrote in her journal, "I was just a witness. It was Storm who showed us what it means to survive and forgive. He reminded me that trust is always a risk, but sometimes it's the only way forward." In her public talks, Harper grew bolder, her voice steadier. She spoke of her own struggles with trust, how, after her father left when she was young, she'd closed herself off for years, certain that letting anyone in would just lead to more hurt. Storm's journey gave her a new perspective. "Healing isn't about forgetting what happened to us," she said to a group of high schoolers. "It's about finding the courage to move forward anyway. Sometimes you have to let go of old pain to make room for new beginnings." The message resonated far beyond the world of horses. In therapy circles, local counselors cited Storm's story in sessions, encouraging clients to see themselves as wild spirits worthy of respect, not just survivors of hard times. Artists painted murals of Storm and his herd on the town's water tower, a permanent tribute to resilience. Even the old-timers, Those who'd once whispered that a horse's job was to serve found themselves wondering. At the annual fall festival, a retired wrangler raised a toast. To Storm, the horse who taught us all a little humility. May we never try to break what was born to run free. As autumn settled over Nevada, the legend of Storm continued to grow. Harper returned often to the canyon, sometimes catching a glimpse of a distant herd at dusk, her heart leaping at the sight of a dark Mustang leading the charge. She knew he might never let her close again, but that was all right. Storm had given her, and the whole community, something more valuable than gratitude. A lesson in wildness, respect, and the kind of healing that could only come when you set another soul free. As the months slipped by, the legend of Storm, the Mustang who wouldn't bow, became woven into the fabric of Nevada life. Autumn passed into a sharp, blue winter. New snows dusted the high mesas, and the nights grew long and star-filled, the world hushed but watchful. And in those quiet evenings, if you stood on the edge of the desert, you might just glimpse a dark shape racing across the flats, a Mustang whose scars caught the moonlight, whose mane streamed wild in the wind, always at the head of the herd. Storm was not easily seen. He and his band had learned to skirt the edges of human territory, appearing and vanishing with a magic that only true wildness can conjure. But sometimes at dusk, a few lucky souls caught a glimpse, the unbreakable stallion, leading his herd through the sage, pausing on a ridge before melting back into the shadows. Each sighting renewed the stories whispered around campfires, in truck stops, and on front porches, a living symbol that hope and wildness could never be fully tamed. Harper Reyes watched Storm's legacy grow with each passing season. Her work at the rescue center blossomed. Spurred by Storm's story, volunteers from across the state arrived, eager to help, bringing with them new ideas and old wisdom. Donations poured in. Not just money, but grain, medical supplies, fencing, and most importantly, time. The center expanded, taking in neglected horses and partnering with local ranchers to find common ground. But the real change was deeper, harder to measure. The town that had once watched Ramona Callahan rule with fear now stood for something better. Kids grew up learning that wild horses weren't nuisances to be captured, but treasures to be cherished. At the local school, students painted a mural of Storm, his silhouette soaring against a backdrop of desert and mountains, a banner beneath reading, "Freedom, respect, redemption." Even ranchers who'd once sided with Ramona admitted, grudgingly at first, that the old ways weren't always the best. Ramona herself faded into the background. Her ranch, under new management and strict oversight, quietly shifted focus to ethical practices. She no longer walked the streets with swagger, her name now a cautionary tale. But some say she changed too, forced to confront the harm she'd caused. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly, but perhaps a kind of redemption, an acknowledgement that no one, not even the proudest, was beyond the reach of change. Harper traveled the region, invited to speak at schools, horse rescues, even city conferences. She always began with Storm's story, her voice carrying the weight of memory and the hope of new beginnings. Redemption, she'd say, isn't about erasing the past. It's about what you choose to do next, how you use your second chance, whether you're a horse, a rancher, or just someone trying to make things right. She encouraged her listeners to see wildness, not as something to be conquered or owned, but as a vital force that reminded people of their own capacity for resilience. You can't own the wild, she'd tell them, her eyes shining. But you can protect it. You can stand up for it, and for those who can't speak for themselves. Redemption is for those brave enough to stand up, for others and for themselves. The Rescue Center's website featured Storm's story, updated regularly with photos of new arrivals and success stories. But always, in the banner, was Storm, his image reminding visitors that courage is contagious and that every act of kindness ripples outward, changing lives in ways you might never expect. Storm himself remained a myth and a miracle. Riders and hikers would sometimes spot him at twilight, his herd ghosting through the grass. Once, a young boy lost in a thunderstorm claimed he saw Storm standing watch nearby, his presence a beacon that guided the searchers to safety. Whether true or just another layer of legend, it was stories like these that kept hope alive, especially for those who needed it most. For Harper, the meaning of Storm's journey revealed itself in quiet moments. A foal taking its first shaky steps, a once broken horse learning to trust again, a kid in the back row raising a hand to ask how to help. She realized that the lesson Storm had given wasn't just about freedom or resistance, but about compassion, the willingness to meet others where they are, to give them space to heal, and to believe in the possibility of change no matter how battered the past. At the end of each talk, Harper always issued the same call to action. Her words, gentle but urgent, echoed in the hearts of those who listened. If you believe in second chances and wild spirits, if you believe that redemption is real and that hope is worth fighting for, then join us. Like and subscribe for more stories of courage, freedom, and healing. Stand up for the wild and for each other. As spring approached and the desert bloomed anew, Storm's hoofprints marked the land, a testament not only to survival, but to the possibility of forgiveness and the enduring power of wildness. His legend would outlive him, carried by the wind, by the stories told and retold, by every soul who looked to the horizon and saw, if only for a heartbeat, a Mustang running free. And in the soft Nevada twilight, with the mountains standing silent guard and the stars flickering overhead, one truth remained. The wild could never be truly owned, but it could and must be fiercely protected. And so, the spirit of Storm galloped on, forever untamed, forever inspiring.